The resume on the mahogany desk was perfect, listing impeccable credentials and a timeline that suspiciously matched the 3 years since she had walked out the door. It was just a standard job application for a senior architect position, but for the man staring at the name Elena Vance, it was a ghost returning to haunt the empire he built from the ashes of their marriage. She thinks she is walking into a stranger's office for a fresh start, unaware that the person holding her future is the one whose past she destroyed. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet wreckage where love and ambition collide, stay with me. There are silences in this story that speak louder than words, and I'd love for you to hear them. The sunset over Manhattan was bleeding crimson against the steel canyons of the city, but inside the corner office of Thorne & Associates, the air was strictly regulated, cool, and smelling faintly of expensive leather and espresso. Gabriel Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the ants scurrying on Fifth Avenue. At 34, he carried himself with the lethal grace of a man who had nothing left to lose, because he had already lost the only thing that mattered 3 years ago. His reflection in the glass showed a sharp jawline, immaculate grooming, and eyes that had traded warmth for calculation. "Mr. Thorne?" The soft voice of his assistant, Nora, broke the silence. Gabriel didn't turn around immediately. He took a sip of his lukewarm water, his gaze lingering on a taxi weaving through traffic. "The shortlist for the senior architect position," Nora said, stepping further into the room and placing a sleek black folder on his desk. "HR has narrowed it down to 5 candidates. They need your final approval before scheduling the interviews for Friday." "Leave it," Gabriel said, his voice a low baritone. When the door clicked shut, Gabriel finally moved. He walked to his desk, a slab of dark walnut that cost more than the apartment he and his ex-wife used to rent in Brooklyn. He sat down, opening the folder with practiced indifference. Candidate 1, Yale graduate, safe, boring. Candidate 2, too much ego in the portfolio. Candidate 3. Gabriel's hand froze. The resume was standard. High-quality paper, Times New Roman font, perfectly formatted. But the name at the top seemed to burn through his retinas. Elena Vance. He stopped breathing for a second. The silence in the room suddenly felt deafening, amplified by the rushing blood in his ears. Vance. Her maiden name. He forced his eyes to scan the document, looking for a discrepancy, a coincidence, a reason to believe this was a different Elena. But the timeline was a damning fingerprint. The graduation year from Pratt Institute, the award for sustainable design in 2021, and then the gap. Employment history, freelance consultant, 2022 present, a polite fiction, a professional lie to cover a 3-year void. Gabriel leaned back, the leather chair creaking under the shift of his weight. Memories he had spent thousands of dollars in therapy to repress clawed their way to the surface. He saw the rain streaking against the window of their old apartment. He saw the suitcases packed by the door. He heard her voice, trembling but resolute, telling him that love wasn't enough, that she couldn't live on dreams and ramen noodles anymore, that Julian Sterling could give her the world. Julian Sterling. The real estate tycoon who treated buildings like poker chips and women like accessories. Gabriel looked at the date on the application. She had applied yesterday. Why was she here? Why here of all places? Did she not know Thorne & Associates was his? It was possible. He had rebranded, hidden behind the corporate veil, letting his work speak while he remained a recluse in the industry press. To the outside world, he was just G. Thorne, a faceless entity of success. He looked at her address. It wasn't the penthouse on the Upper East Side where Sterling lived. It was a small apartment in Queens, a rough neighborhood. A dark, cold curiosity twisted in his gut. It was a dangerous feeling, mixed with a bitter, simmering anger that had never truly cooled. She wanted a job? She wanted to step back into the world she had abandoned him to escape? Gabriel reached for the intercom button on his desk. His finger hovered over it, trembling slightly before he steeled himself. "Nora," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the storm raging behind his ribs. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." "The third candidate, Elena Vance?" "Oh, yes. Her portfolio is impressive, though the employment gap is a bit concerning. Shall I have HR screen her out?" Gabriel picked up the resume, his thumb brushing over her name. He remembered how her hand used to feel in his. He remembered how she looked when she left. "No," Gabriel said, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the crimson sunset turning into a bruised purple. "Cancel the HR screening. I'll interview her myself." "You, sir? You usually don't take the first round." "I'm making an exception," Gabriel replied, closing the folder with a definitive snap. "Schedule her for the last slot on Friday, 6 p.m. when the office is empty." "Understood, Mr. Thorne." Gabriel released the button. He swiveled his chair back to the window. The city lights were flickering on, a million artificial stars for the lonely. "Welcome back, Elena," he thought, the reflection in the glass smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see what you've become." The waiting room on the 40th floor was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. It was 5:55 p.m. The receptionist had already left for the weekend, leaving Elena Vance alone with her reflection in the darkened glass of the entrance doors. She smoothed the skirt of her navy suit for the 10th time. It was an old piece, one of the few high-quality items she had managed to keep from her previous life. It fit looser now than it did 3 years ago. Stress had carved the softness from her frame, leaving behind sharp angles and hollows. She needed this job. Her bank account was overdrawn, and the notices from the collection agency were piling up on her kitchen counter like snowdrifts. "Ms. Vance?" Elena jumped slightly. A poised woman with an impassive face stood by the double mahogany doors. "Mr. Thorne is ready for you." Elena exhaled a shaky breath, picked up her portfolio, and followed. The hallway was long, lined with architectural awards and monochromatic photos of stark, imposing buildings. They stopped at the end of the corridor. The assistant opened the door and stepped aside. Not entering, Elena walked in. The office was cavernous, dimly lit by a sleek, modern desk lamp and the glow of the city grid outside. A man sat behind the massive desk, his back to the window, his face partially obscured by shadows. "Good evening," Elena began, her voice practicing the confidence she didn't feel. "Thank you for seeing me so late on a Friday." "Have a seat, Ms. Vance." The voice stopped her dead in her tracks. It was deeper, colder, stripped of any warmth she remembered, but the timbre was unmistakable. It hit her chest like a physical blow. Elena froze, her hand gripping the back of the guest chair until her knuckles turned white. As the man leaned forward into the pool of light, the features became clear. The sharp jawline, the dark eyes that used to look at her with adoration, now observing her like a specimen under a microscope. Gabriel. The air left the room. Elena felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She took a half-step back, her instinct screaming at her to run, to flee the building, to disappear. But the weight of her unpaid rent and the image of her mother's medical bills anchored her feet to the floor. "Gabriel?" she whispered, the name slipping out before she could catch it. "Mr. Thorne," he corrected, his tone dry and professional. He didn't blink. Please sit down. We have a lot to cover. Elena lowered herself into the chair, her legs trembling. This was a nightmare. She had known the firm was Thorne and Associates, but Gabriel had been a struggling freelancer when she left, working out of coffee shops. She never imagined he was this Thorne. Gabriel opened her file, ignoring her evident distress. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the papers. Your portfolio is competent, he said, flipping a page. Standard Pratt education. Some decent residential work in Brooklyn back in 2020. But then, he paused, tapping his finger on the paper. The sound echoed in the silence. There is a significant gap. 3 years, to be precise. He looked up then, locking eyes with her. His gaze was impenetrable, a wall of dark glass. Tell me, Miss Vance, what have you been doing for the last 3 years that isn't listed here? It was a trap. They both knew it. He wasn't asking about her career. He was asking about the betrayal. He was asking about the night she walked out into the rain and got into Julian Sterling's limousine. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry. I took a sabbatical. Personal reasons. A 3-year sabbatical, Gabriel repeated, a cruel smirk touching the corner of his mouth. Must have been luxurious. Most people in this city can't afford to stop working for 3 weeks, let alone 3 years. He leaned back, his eyes dropping to her hands, which were clenched in her lap. He noticed the absence of rings. Then his gaze traveled lower, landing on her shoes. They were polished, but worn at the toes, the leather scuffed. A small detail, but Gabriel was an architect. He noticed structural failures. I faced some unexpected challenges, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She refused to cry. She would not give him that satisfaction. But I am ready to return to work. I am capable, Gabriel. You know I am. Mr. Thorne, he corrected again, sharper this time. And I don't know anything about who you are anymore, Ms. Vance. The person I knew had ambition. The resume in front of me shows a quitter. He closed the folder. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. Give me one reason why I should hire someone who abandons projects when something better comes along? Elena looked at him. For the first time, she saw the pain buried deep beneath the layer of ice. She straightened her spine. She had no dignity left to lose, only the job to gain. Because I have nothing else, she said, her voice steadying. And because I will work harder than anyone else in this building just to prove that I belong here. Gabriel held her gaze for a long, agonizing minute. The silence stretched, filled with the ghosts of everything they hadn't said. We'll see, he finally said. Gabriel opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to her directly. Instead, he slid it across the polished walnut surface. It stopped inches from Elena's hands, a white island on a dark sea. I'm prepared to offer you a position, Gabriel said, his voice devoid of inflection. Junior drafter, probationary period of 6 months. Elena stared at the paper. The title alone was a slap in the face. She was a licensed architect with award-winning designs under her belt. A junior drafter was a role for fresh graduates, for interns who fetched coffee and corrected line weights on bathroom elevations. Then her eyes drifted to the salary figure at the bottom. Gabriel, she started, her voice tight. This is 40% below market rate, even for a junior role. Mr. Thorne, he corrected for the 3rd time, the repetition like a lash. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. You have a 3-year gap in your resume, Ms. Vance. In this industry, 3 years is a lifetime. Codes change, software updates, trends shift. You are a liability. I am taking a risk by even letting you into the building. Elena looked up from the paper to my face. The man sitting there was a stranger wearing her husband's skin. The Gabriel she knew used to stay up all night helping her with her thesis, making her tea, telling her she was brilliant. That man was dead. She had killed him. "Is this punishment?" she asked quietly. Gabriel's expression didn't flicker. "This is business. Thorne and Associates is a premier firm. If you want charity, try a nonprofit. If you want a job, sign the paper." Elena looked back down at the contract. Her hands were trembling beneath the desk. She thought of the voicemail she had received that morning from the care facility in New Jersey. Her mother's condition was deteriorating. The medication wasn't covered by the state insurance anymore. She needed $5,000 by the end of the month just to keep a roof over her mother's head. She had applied to 20 firms. Only this one had called her back. She felt the walls of the office closing in. The panoramic view of the New York skyline, glittering with promise, felt like a mockery. She was trapped in this glass cage with the wreckage of her past. "I have conditions," she said, though her voice lacked force. "You are not in a position to negotiate." Gabriel cut in smoothly. "Take it or leave it. The door is behind you." He glanced at his watch, a dismissive gesture that stung more than his words. He was bored. He was busy. She was an inconvenience. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a pen. It was a cheap plastic biro, not the fountain pen she used to favor. The sound of the click echoed in the quiet room. She felt a wave of nausea as she lowered the pen to the paper. By signing this, she wasn't just accepting a job. She was signing away her pride. She was agreeing to be his subordinate, to be watched, to be judged every single day. But she had no choice. The ghost of her mother's frail smile pushed her hand forward. She signed. The signature was jagged, unlike her usual elegant script. Gabriel watched her. For a split second, something flickered in his dark eyes. Disappointment? Regret? Anger? It was gone before she could decipher it. He reached out and took the paper back, inspecting the signature as if checking for forgery. "Welcome to Thorne and Associates," he said, the words hollow. "You start Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. My team doesn't tolerate tardiness." "I won't be," Elena said, standing up. Her legs felt heavy. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." "One more thing," Gabriel said, stopping her as she turned to leave. She paused, looking back. He was standing now, silhouetted against the window, a looming figure of success and vengeance. "We keep our history out of the office," he said. "To everyone on this floor, you are just another employee. I expect you to act like one. No favors, no special treatment. If you slip up, you're out." "I understand," Elena whispered. She walked out of the office, past the silent assistant, and into the elevator. Only when the steel doors slid shut, sealing her in the reflective metal box, did she allow her shoulders to slump. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal, closing her eyes as the elevator plummeted 40 floors down, taking her stomach with it. She had the job. She had saved herself. But as she descended into the dark lobby, she knew the real hell was just beginning. The design floor at Thorne and Associates was an architectural marvel, an open-plan expanse of polished concrete and white oak, flooded with natural light. Ideally, it was designed to foster collaboration and transparency. For Elena, however, it felt like a panopticon. Her desk was not located near the windows with the views of the Hudson River. Instead, She had been assigned a workstation in the center of the bullpen, directly adjacent to the high-speed plotters. It was a chaotic, noisy spot usually reserved for summer interns. By 10 a.m. on Monday, the whispers had already started. They weren't loud, but they were pervasive, buzzing like static electricity underneath the hum of hard drives. Elena kept her head down, focusing intensely on the red lines of a parking garage schematic, grunt work that a senior architect hadn't touched in a decade. "Is that her?" a voice murmured from the break area. "Yeah, the one Thorne hired personally on a Friday night. She looks older than the usual type he dates." "Shh, she's right there." Elena's hand tightened around her mouse, but she didn't look up. She had expected this. In a city like New York, information was currency, and her anomalous hiring was inflation. To them, she was either a nepotism hire or a mistress. No one suspected she was the ex-wife who had helped name the company before it even existed. High above the bullpen, overlooking the floor like a king in his keep, was Gabriel's office. The entire front wall was glass. From her desk, if she angled her head just right, she could see him, and he could see her. Gabriel stood by the glass wall, a phone pressed to his ear, his eyes fixed on the small figure in the center of the room. He watched the way she hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller. He watched the other designers walk past her desk without acknowledging her existence. He felt a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction. "This is what the real world feels like, Elena," he thought. No safety net. No Julian Sterling to smooth the edges. But as the lunch hour approached, the satisfaction began to sour into something sharper: confusion. At 1 p.m., the office emptied out. Groups of designers left for the trendy salad bars and sushi spots on Lex. Gabriel expected Elena to leave, perhaps to call someone, or to find a quiet place to cry. Instead, she remained at her desk. Gabriel watched as she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a Tupperware container. Inside was a sandwich, plain white bread, maybe turkey or cheese. No artisanal baguette, no overpriced latte. She ate slowly, staring at her screen, continuing to work with her left hand while she ate with her right. It was a small detail, but it snagged in Gabriel's mind. The Elena he knew, or thought he knew, hated leftovers. She used to say that lunch was a sensory experience that shouldn't be wasted on mediocrity. She had left him because he couldn't afford the lifestyle she felt she deserved. So why was she eating a stale sandwich in an empty office, wearing a suit that had clearly been dry cleaned too many times? He hung up the phone, his gaze narrowing. The narrative he had constructed over the last 3 years, that she was a gold digger who had simply failed to secure her next payout, wasn't aligning with the woman sitting 40 feet below him. She didn't look entitled. She looked exhausted. Elena felt the weight of his gaze. It was a physical sensation, like heat on the back of her neck. She paused mid-bite, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly, against her better judgment, she lifted her head. Their eyes met through the expanse of air and glass. He was a silhouette of power. She was a portrait of defeat. For a second, the office noise faded. She wanted to glare at him, to scream that she was human, that she was trying, but she couldn't. She needed this paycheck. She broke eye contact first, lowering her head back to the parking garage blueprints. She took another bite of the dry sandwich, swallowing it down with a sip of tap water from her bottle. Up in the glass tower, Gabriel turned away from the window, an inexplicable irritation rising in his chest. He didn't like mysteries, and Elena Vance had just become one. 2 weeks into her probation, The firm hosted a mandatory networking gala at a gallery in Chelsea. It was exactly the kind of event the old Elena would have dominated. She used to thrive in these environments: champagne flutes, ambient jazz, and the subtle art of charming potential investors. Tonight, however, Elena stood in the shadow of a large abstract sculpture, clutching a glass of sparkling water like a shield. She wore a simple black dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, standing out starkly against the sea of backless gowns and glittering jewelry worn by the wives of the partners. The noise of the room, a cacophony of laughter and low voices, felt abrasive, grating against her frayed nerves. She kept her eyes on the exit sign, calculating the minutes until she could politely leave without being fired. Across the room, Gabriel held court near the bar. He looked effortless in a charcoal suit, swirling a scotch as he spoke to a group of developers. Yet his attention wasn't fully on them. Every few minutes his gaze would cut through the crowd, seeking out the dark figure in the corner. He was waiting for her to work the room. He expected her to network, to flirt, to climb the social ladder as she always had. But she remained static, almost blending into the drywall. "Elena? Is that you?" The voice came from her left. Elena froze. The blood drained from her face as she turned. Standing there was Marcus Vane, a wealthy contractor who had frequently attended parties at Julian Sterling's penthouse. He was a large man, loud and overly tactile, smelling of heavy cologne and cigar smoke. "Mr. Vane?" Elena managed, her voice barely audible. "I haven't seen you in ages!" Marcus boomed, stepping into her personal space. "Not since you were on Julian's arm at the Hamptons. Whatever happened to you two? I heard rumors, but—" "I'm working now," she interrupted, taking a step back. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Excuse me, I need to—" "Oh, come on, don't be shy," Marcus laughed, oblivious to her terror. He reached out, his hand closing over her upper arm in a gesture meant to be friendly, but feeling, to her, like a shackle. "Let me buy you a drink. We need to catch up." The moment his fingers tightened on her bicep, the gallery vanished. Elena wasn't in Chelsea anymore. She was back in the marble hallway of the penthouse. It was 3:00 a.m. She could smell the alcohol on Julian's breath. She could feel the crushing grip before the shove. "Don't touch me. Don't touch me." Her reaction was visceral and violent. She didn't just pull away. She flinched, her body jerking back with a gasp that was too loud for the polite setting. Her water glass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the polished concrete floor. Crash. The sound silenced the immediate vicinity. Marcus pulled his hand back, looking offended and confused. "Whoa, easy there. I was just being friendly." Elena was hyperventilating. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, fixed on the broken glass. She was shaking so hard she thought her knees would buckle. I'm sorry. From across the room, Gabriel saw everything. He had seen Vane reach out. He had seen the touch. It was innocuous, a standard social gesture. But he had also seen Elena's face. He had expected annoyance. He had expected arrogance. He did not expect sheer, unadulterated terror. He saw the way her pupils blew wide, the way she curled inward as if expecting a blow. That wasn't the reaction of a woman who had spent 3 years living in luxury. That was the reaction of a wounded animal cornered in a cage. Gabriel set his scotch down on a passing tray, his movement abrupt. He crossed the room in long strides, ignoring the people trying to flag him down. He reached the circle of silence just as Elena bent down to pick up the glass shards with her bare hands. "Stop," Gabriel commanded, his voice low but cutting through the tension. Elena flinched again at his voice, dropping a shard. A drop of bright red blood welled up on her fingertip. Gabriel stepped between her and Marcus Vane, using his height to create a barrier. He looked at Vane with eyes that could freeze water. "Mr. Vane," Gabriel said, his tone icy, "I think you've had enough conversation for one evening." "I didn't do anything, Thorne," Vane stammered, holding his hands up. "She just freaked out." Gabriel didn't look at him. He turned to Elena. She was staring at the blood on her finger, her chest heaving. "Leave it," Gabriel ordered, nodding at the glass. He didn't touch her. He sensed with a sudden, sickening clarity that touching her right now would shatter her completely. "Go to the washroom, clean that cut, then go home." The glass. The cleaning staff will handle it. Go." Elena scrambled up, clutching her bleeding finger, and fled towards the restrooms without looking back. Gabriel watched her go. The anger that had fueled him for 3 years was suddenly quiet, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He looked down at the broken glass and the single drop of blood on the floor. "What happened to you, Elena?" he thought. "What the hell happened to you?" The deadline for the Sterling Heights Library proposal was less than 12 hours away, and the structural integrity of the main atrium was failing in the simulation. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The city outside was a blurred watercolor painting of rain and neon, but inside the design studio, the atmosphere was brittle with tension. Gabriel stood over the central drafting table, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He stared at the large A1 printout as if he could intimidate the steel beams into holding more weight. "It doesn't work," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "The cantilever is too heavy. If we add the support columns, we lose the aesthetic of the floating roof." He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, mostly because he thought he was alone. But a soft rustle of paper from the shadows of the bullpen made him turn. Elena was still there. She was sitting at her desk, bathed in the glow of her dual monitors, surrounded by stacks of code compliance books. She hadn't gone home. "It's not the weight," she said softly. Gabriel stiffened. "Excuse me?" Elena hesitated, then stood up. She walked slowly toward the main table, her movements cautious, like a bomb disposal technician approaching a live wire. She stopped at the edge of the table, keeping a respectful distance. "It's not the weight of the cantilever," she repeated, her eyes fixed on the blueprints, ignoring Gabriel's imposing presence. "It's the tension distribution. You're trying to anchor it to the central core, but the torque is too high. You need to counterbalance it." "Counterbalance it with what?" Gabriel challenged, though his tone lacked its usual bite. He was too tired for anger, and deep down, he knew she was a better structural theorist than he was. "With the staircase," Elena said. She reached for a stick of charcoal lying on the table. "May I?" Gabriel stared at her for a beat, then stepped back, gesturing for her to proceed. Elena leaned over the drawing. The moment the charcoal touched the paper, she transformed. The hunched, fearful woman from the gala disappeared. Her spine straightened. Her hand moved with swift, confident strokes, sketching a spiral support system disguised as a grand staircase. "If you shift the load here," she murmured, drawing a thick black line, "and anchor it to the bedrock on the north side, the staircase acts as a tension rod. It holds the roof up." Gabriel watched her hand move. He watched the furrow of concentration on her brow, the way she chewed her lower lip when she was thinking. It was a habit she had since college. For a moment, The 3 years of ice between them melted. They weren't CEO and employee, nor ex-husband and traitor. They were just two architects speaking the only language that had ever made sense to them. That could work, Gabriel admitted, leaning in closer. He grabbed a red marker. But you'd have to compromise the lobby height. Not if you use glass treads, Elena countered immediately, sketching over his red line. Keep it transparent. Light passes through. The structure becomes invisible. They worked in silence for an hour, passing pencils back and forth, their shoulders brushing occasionally as they leaned over the vast paper. The smell of rain and graphite filled the air. It was intimate, a dance of minds that was far more dangerous than any physical touch. There, Gabriel said, stepping back, looking at the revised sketch. It was brilliant. It saved the project. It holds. He turned to look at Elena. She was smiling, a genuine small smile of professional triumph. It was the first time he had seen her smile in 3 years. It holds, she agreed, reaching across the table to grab the eraser to clean up a smudge. As she stretched her arm out, the sleeve of her oversized cardigan slid up. Gabriel's eyes dropped to her wrist. The smile vanished from his face instantly. There, on the pale skin of her inner forearm, was a scar. It wasn't a surgical scar or an accident. It was a series of 4 circular burns, faded but distinct, arranged in a pattern that looked sickeningly like fingertips, like someone had grabbed her with a hand hot enough to brand her. Or perhaps a cigar? Elena followed his gaze. She froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She yanked her arm back, pulling the sleeve down aggressively, covering the marks. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The artistic connection they had just shared shattered into a million pieces. "Elena," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "What is that?" "Nothing," she stammered, backing away from the table. "It's nothing. A kitchen accident." "That doesn't look like a kitchen accident," Gabriel said, stepping toward her. "That looks like a burn." "I have to go," Elena said, her voice rising in panic. She grabbed her bag from the floor. "It's late, I have to go." "Elena, wait." "Good night, Mr. Thorne." She turned and practically ran toward the elevators, her footsteps echoing frantically in the empty office. Gabriel stood by the drafting table, his hand hovering over the brilliant design she had just saved. But he wasn't looking at the building anymore. He was seeing the marks on her skin, and the terrifying realization was finally taking root in his mind. She hadn't left him for a better life. She had walked into a nightmare. The morning sun hit the glass facade of Thorne and Associates with blinding intensity, but the temperature inside the office dropped 20 degrees the moment the elevator doors slid open at 10 a.m. Julian Sterling did not make appointments. He arrived with the entitlement of a man who owned half the skyline. Flanked by 2 suits who looked more like bodyguards than lawyers, he strode into the bullpen, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of productivity. "I was told Thorne set up shop here," Julian announced, looking around with a sneer of distaste. "Quaint. A bit industrial for my taste, but I suppose budget constraints are a reality for some." Gabriel emerged from his office. He didn't rush. He walked down the floating staircase with deliberate slowness, buttoning his jacket. The entire floor had gone silent. "Sterling," Gabriel said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. "I don't recall seeing your name on my calendar." "I'm here about the library project," Julian said, dismissing the pleasantries. "I heard a rumor you solved the structural issues. I'm here to buy the design. Cash." "It's not for sale to you." Gabriel replied calmly. Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Everything is for sale, Gabriel. You should know that. You learned it the hard way. The insult landed with the precision of a sniper shot. The air in the room grew heavy. Julian's eyes began to roam the office, bored with the business talk, until they landed on a desk near the plotters. Elena was frozen. She had tried to shrink behind her monitor, but there was nowhere to hide. "Well, well," Julian drawled, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he stepped toward her. "I wondered where you crawled off to. Look at you. Working for a living? How pedestrian." Elena couldn't breathe. The scent of his cologne, musk, and expensive tobacco drifted toward her, triggering a wave of nausea so potent she gripped the edge of her desk to keep from falling. "Leave her alone," Gabriel said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command whipped through the room like a lash. Julian ignored him. He stopped right in front of Elena's desk, leaning down, invading her space. "You ran away before I was finished with you, Elle. You know I don't like it when my things get lost. Did you tell your little savior here about the debts you left behind? Or about what happens when you disobey?" Elena was trembling visibly now, her eyes wide and fixed on the floor. "Please," she whispered, "just go." "I'll go when I'm ready," Julian hissed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Get your hands off my architect." Gabriel moved. He crossed the distance between them in 2 seconds, positioning himself physically between Julian and Elena. He stood taller than the older man, his body tense, radiating a dangerous, controlled violence. "You are trespassing," Gabriel said, his voice low and lethal. "Get out of my building, now, or I will have security remove you, and I will make sure the footage of Julian Sterling being dragged out of a rival firm leads the 6 o'clock news." Julian straightened his jacket, his eyes narrowing. He looked from Gabriel's stony face to Elena's cowering form. He saw the shift in power. He chuckled darkly. "She's damaged goods, Thorne. You'll see. You're welcome to my scraps." Julian turned and signaled to his entourage. As the elevator doors closed on his retreating smirk, the silence in the office was deafening. Every eye was on Elena. "Show is over," Gabriel barked at the room, startling the staff back to work. "Everyone, back to it." He turned to Elena. She was hyperventilating, clutching her chest. Without a word, he took her arm, gently this time, and guided her up the stairs into his office. He closed the door and hit the button that frosted the glass, shutting out the world. Elena collapsed onto the leather sofa, burying her face in her hands. "He's going to ruin you," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "He destroys everything he touches. I shouldn't be here. I have to leave." "You aren't going anywhere," Gabriel said. He poured a glass of water and set it on the table before her. He sat on the edge of his desk, watching her. "Tell me the truth, Elena. No more lies. No more pride. Why did you really leave 3 years ago?" Elena looked up. Her mascara was running, her face blotchy. The mask of the cold, ambitious woman was gone. "Because we were drowning," she whispered. "You don't know. The debt. My father's gambling debt. The sharks were coming for you, Gabriel. They threatened to burn down your first studio. Julian. He promised to make it go away. He said if I went with him, he'd clear the accounts and leave you alone." Gabriel felt the blood drain from his face. "You left to pay off a debt?" "I thought I could handle him," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it was a transaction. I was so arrogant. But the moment I walked into that penthouse, he took my phone. He took my passport. It wasn't a relationship, Gabriel. It was a prison. She pulled up her sleeve, exposing the burn marks he had seen the night before, and pulled it higher to reveal a faint, jagged scar near her elbow. "He liked to teach lessons," she said, her voice hollow. "When I tried to leave the first time, he broke my arm. When I refused to attend his parties, he locked me in the guest room for days without food. I didn't stay because I wanted his money. I stayed because I was terrified he would kill me. Or kill you." Gabriel stared at her. The anger that had sustained him for 3 years, the fuel for his empire, evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a crater of horror and guilt. He had built a fortress to keep out the memory of a woman who had been fighting a war to keep him safe. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I was ashamed," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "And because by the time I escaped, I felt I deserved it." Gabriel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had conquered. It suddenly looked very small. The autumn wind off the East River carried the bite of approaching winter, stripping the trees in Brooklyn Bridge Park of their last golden leaves. It was late November. 2 months had passed since Julian Sterling had been escorted out of the lobby, and 1 week since the Sterling Heights library design had won the city's unanimous approval. Gabriel stood by the railing, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city lights were beginning to shimmer against the twilight, a view he had looked at 1,000 times. Yet tonight, it felt different. It no longer looked like a battlefield to be conquered. It just looked like home. He heard footsteps behind him, light, hesitant, familiar. "You picked a cold spot for a victory celebration," Elena said, coming to stand beside him. She looked better. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out slightly, and the haunted look in her eyes had softened into a quiet melancholy. She wasn't wearing the drab, oversized clothes anymore. She wore a tailored wool coat, simple but elegant, the kind of clothes the old Elena would have worn, but worn with a new, somber dignity. "I have the contract for you," Gabriel said, reaching into his coat pocket. He didn't hand it over immediately. "Senior partner, full benefits, and a salary that actually reflects your worth, plus back pay for the last 2 months." It was everything he wanted to give her. It was his way of fixing things, of rewriting the last 3 years of pain with stability and security. Elena looked at the envelope in his hand, but she didn't take it. She kept her hands deep in her pockets, staring at the dark water churning below them. "I can't sign it, Gabriel," she said softly. Gabriel turned to her, his brow furrowing. "Why? Is it not enough? I can double it. I can—" "It's not about the money," she interrupted, turning to face him. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and she tucked it back with a hand that no longer trembled. "I can't work for you, Gabriel, and I can't be with you. Not right now." "I'm not asking you to be with me," Gabriel lied, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I just want you to be safe. I want to take care of you." "That's exactly why I have to go," Elena said, her voice steady. "For 3 years, my survival depended on a man. First, I left to save you. Then, I stayed to survive Julian. If I stay now because you want to save me, I'll never know who I actually am. I'll just be a broken thing that you glued back together." Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the scars, both the physical one on her arm hidden beneath the wool, and the invisible ones in her psyche. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that he loved her, that the anger was gone, that they could rebuild the firm and their lives together. But he was an architect. He knew that you couldn't build a stable structure on a fractured foundation. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice rough. Chicago, she said. I have an old friend from Pratt there. She runs a small restoration firm. It's not glamorous, no skyscrapers, just fixing old, broken things. She offered a small, sad smile. Fitting, right? You're a brilliant architect, Elena. You shouldn't be fixing windows. I need to fix myself first. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the sacrifice, the abuse, the silence. But it wasn't an angry silence anymore. It was the silence of a wound finally being stitched closed. Gabriel nodded slowly. He put the envelope back in his pocket. Do you need anything? Money? A reference? Just your forgiveness, she whispered, tears finally glistening in her eyes. Not for leaving, but for not trusting you enough to tell you the truth back then. Gabriel reached out. This time she didn't flinch. He took her gloved hand in his, squeezing it firmly. You have it, he said. You've had it for a while. He let go of her hand. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than building his empire, harder than watching her leave the first time. Because this time, he understood. Go, he said, before I change my mind and beg you to stay. Elena nodded. She stepped forward, rising on her tiptoes, and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to his cheek. It was a goodbye, but it felt like a promise. Thank you, Gabriel. She turned and walked away, her boots crunching on the gravel path. Gabriel stayed by the rail, watching her figure recede into the shadows of the park. He didn't follow her. He turned back to the city, to the lights of the buildings he had built and the ones he had yet to design. The architecture of their lives had collapsed. Yes, but the rubble was cleared. And for the first time in 3 years, the ground was solid enough to build something new.